I thought I knew my husband, my marriage, and my friend. But sometimes, the people you trust most hold secrets so unsettling they can turn your entire life upside down. This is the story of how my once peaceful home became a battleground for love, loyalty, and betrayal, all because of one unexpected visitor. Three years into my marriage, life had settled into a steady rhythm. My husband, Daniel, worked overseas, often taking long stints abroad to provide for our family. His job allowed us a comfortable lifestyle, and I could stay home to raise our energetic 2-year-old triplets, Sophia, Liam, and Noah. Days were chaotic but fulfilling. From dawn till dusk, my world revolved around diaper changes, mealtime routines, nap schedules, and the endless cycle of laughter and tears that comes with raising toddlers. I was bone-tired by the end of every day, but the joy and purpose I found in our little family was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But then, one ordinary afternoon, as I finished putting the kids down for a nap, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a woman standing there, one I knew but struggled to place immediately. Her face was familiar yet worn, a face from a chapter of my life that felt like a distant memory. It was Amelia, an old friend from high school, someone I had once shared countless secrets and late-night conversations with. Amelia and I had drifted apart over the years, each of us swept up in the current of our own lives. She looked different though, tired, almost haunted, with eyes that seemed older than her years. Her clothes were faded, and her once proud posture now held a subtle slump. Life, it seemed, had been rough on her. The girl who once radiated laughter and ambition now stood before me as a shadow of her former self. Her appearance tugged at something deep inside me, but I decided to mind my business and keep things light. After all, we were just two acquaintances catching up on lost time. Amelia. Wow. It's been ages. I greeted her, surprised and genuinely happy to see a familiar face. She smiled, though it was a far cry from the bright, carefree grin I remembered. "Lucy, it's really good to see you," she replied, her voice soft but lined with weariness. We spent a few minutes exchanging pleasantries, a polite but strained conversation, touching briefly on the years since high school. She mentioned she was in town to pick up some necessities, but with each passing second, it became clear she was holding back something. I chose not to press her and instead gave her my number, promising to stay in touch. She left with a small wave, and we parted ways. That night, after putting the kids to bed and curling up with a book, my phone buzzed. It was Amelia. I could hear the raw emotion in her voice the moment I picked up. She thanked me for listening to her earlier, but now the floodgates opened. She started recounting the difficult years that had passed since high school. Her mother's illness and eventual passing, the heartbreak and financial ruin it left her with, and how life had unraveled for her after that. She described how she'd lost her job, and with it, any sense of stability. Then, the most urgent of her worries, her landlord had served her with an eviction notice, leaving her with nowhere to go. Her voice cracked as she admitted she was ashamed, even embarrassed, to be asking for help. Hearing her story tugged painfully at my heartstrings. I thought about the comfortable home I had, the security Daniel's hard work had given us, and I found myself feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. After Amelia finished speaking, there was a silence on the line. My mind raced as I processed her words, envisioning what I'd just heard. I couldn't imagine going through something so difficult without anyone to lean on. Even though Amelia and I had grown apart, I remembered the girl she had once been. Kind, fiercely loyal, and full of dreams. The idea of her being homeless, struggling alone, was more than I could bear. I told her I'd think things over and give her an answer the following day. I needed to discuss this with Daniel first. I waited until morning to call Daniel, knowing the time difference between us meant he'd just be waking up. I explained the situation carefully, detailing Amelia's hardships and how she had no one else to turn to. Daniel listened patiently, and I could almost picture him on the other end, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "Lucy," he began after a moment's pause, "I understand. She needs help, and I trust your judgment. If you feel it's the right thing to do, let her stay. But please just make sure it's temporary. I don't want you getting overwhelmed with the kids and a guest in the house. Promise me that, okay?" His understanding lifted a weight from my shoulders. and with his support, I felt certain about my decision. Daniel had always been a steady presence in my life, a calm voice of reason, even from thousands of miles away. His willingness to help reminded me of all the reasons I'd fallen in love with him. Later that day, I called Amelia and told her that she was welcome to stay with us until she could find a stable place. But I made it clear this was temporary and that she'd need to look for a job to stand on her own feet again. To my relief, she agreed readily, her gratitude palpable. "Thank you, Lucy. You don't know what this means to me," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The following week, Amelia arrived with a single worn-out suitcase. Seeing her belongings packed into such a small space gave me a glimpse of just how much she had lost. I showed her to the guest room and, after a short tour of the house, introduced her to the kids. My triplets, always curious, took to her immediately, their bright smiles and giggles momentarily lifting the weight from her face. At first, everything went smoothly. Amelia proved to be a great help with the children, her patience and warmth endearing her to them. Having her around made my life easier, and I found myself grateful for the company as well. Evenings, once filled with an eerie silence, were now punctuated with conversation and laughter. She shared stories from our high school days, and soon enough, it felt like old times again. Clara was nothing short of a blessing. From the moment she moved in, it felt like a weight had lifted from my shoulders. Clara was eager to help, taking on tasks I'd long since grown weary of. She would sweep through the house each morning, tidying up the aftermath of toys, crumbs, and baby blankets that littered every surface. She took over bedtime stories when I was too tired to keep my eyes open, and even stepped in when the triplets' nap time turned into a chaotic wrestling match. More than that, she became a shoulder to lean on. She'd sit with me in the evenings, listening to my daily triumphs and frustrations, nodding empathetically as I talked about Daniel's absence and the struggles of raising 3 toddlers alone. For the first time since Daniel had left, I felt less alone. Clara quickly became my friend, my confidant. I even began to think of her as an unofficial live-in nanny, grateful to have someone I could count on in a way I hadn't realized I needed. And then, in July, everything changed. Daniel returned home for his annual visit. It was something I had been eagerly anticipating, looking forward to the few precious weeks when our little family could feel whole again. The kids were over the moon to see their dad, and I felt a deep sense of relief, knowing I'd have him by my side, even if only temporarily. Daniel's presence always brought a sense of stability, a grounding that was hard to come by in the chaos of raising 3 small children alone. But something unexpected happened. From the moment Daniel arrived, Clara's behavior shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Where she had once dressed in loose, comfortable clothes, she now seemed to favor outfits that were snug and form-fitting. Her tops became noticeably tighter, sometimes alarmingly revealing, and often she'd stroll around the house without a bray. Thin straps hung off her shoulders, her chest visible beneath sheer fabrics. Shorts she wore sat higher on her legs than I'd ever seen, making me wonder where these clothes had been hiding when she first arrived. It wasn't just the clothes, her demeanor changed too. She seemed to have a newfound confidence, a subtle yet undeniable swagger that was absent when it was just her and me. It was in the way she moved, a sway in her hips, a lingering glance at Daniel that seemed to last just a little too long. Clara, the girl who had once been modest and unassuming, was suddenly presenting herself as someone different, someone I didn't recognize. I didn't think too much of it until one evening when we were all in the living room. The kids had finally fallen asleep, and we were sitting around chatting and laughing, reminiscing about high school memories. Clara made some offhand joke about back when I could actually get a date, flipping her hair as if she were casting herself in some private spotlight. Daniel chuckled, and in a moment of what he probably thought was harmless teasing, he looked at me and then back at her, remarking, "You haven't changed much, Clara. You still have that youthful charm." The words stung in a way I hadn't expected. I felt an inexplicable surge of jealousy, a feeling that was both unfamiliar and unwelcome. This was my husband, my home, yet here he was, admiring someone else in a way that felt too familiar, too close. I managed a forced laugh, brushing it off as a joke, but I couldn't shake the discomfort that had taken root deep within me. The following day, still feeling unsettled, I decided to speak with Clara. Perhaps I was overreacting, letting my insecurities get the best of me. But I also felt a responsibility to maintain a certain level of respect within the house, especially now that Daniel was home. After breakfast, I approached her while she was tidying up in the kitchen, trying to find the right words without coming off as judgmental or controlling. "Clara," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I was wondering if you could be a little more unmindful of how you're dressing around the house. It's just that, with Daniel home, I think it would be more appropriate if you could, dress a bit more modestly." She paused, looking up from the sink, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or maybe even amusement. But she quickly masked it, laughing lightly as if I'd told her a funny joke. "Lucy, come on," she replied, flashing a grin that felt oddly condescending. "It's not like Daniel's never seen a woman before. Maybe he should just learn to control his eyes." She winked, chuckling as if her comment was a harmless joke. I was stunned, caught off guard by her casual dismissal. This wasn't the Clara I remembered. The one who used to be respectful, who never would have dared to speak this way. Her comment, her tone, it felt dismissive, almost mocking, and it stirred something unsettling within me. Over the next few days, however, things didn't improve. If anything, Clara seemed to double down on her new, carefree attitude. Her clothes became even more revealing, and the line between friendly familiarity and something else entirely began to blur. I started to notice her positioning herself close to Daniel during family meals, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, lightly touching his arm when they spoke. Daniel, for his part, didn't seem to notice, or at least he acted as though he didn't, but there were moments when I'd catch him glancing at her out of the corner of his eye, a subtle, almost subconscious reaction that left me feeling a gnawing sense of inadequacy. I found myself questioning everything. My appearance, my personality, the things I offered as a wife and mother. I knew these thoughts were irrational, perhaps even unfair, but they were there, festering like an open wound. One evening, I finally worked up the courage to confront Daniel about it. After the kids had gone to bed, I found him in the living room scrolling through his phone. I sat beside him, my heart pounding as I tried to form the words. I knew it was a delicate topic, but I couldn't keep ignoring the unease that had become a constant companion. "Daniel," I started hesitantly, "have you noticed? The way Clara's been acting. I mean, the way she dresses and, well, how she interacts with you." He looked up, surprised, and chuckled. "Oh, come on, Lucy. She's just being herself. You know Clara. She's always been a bit playful." "It's more than that, Daniel," I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. "She's changed since you came home. And honestly, it makes me uncomfortable." Daniel sighed, putting his phone down and looking at me with a hint of exasperation. "You're overthinking things, Lucy. She's been a huge help around here, and you know it. Besides, I'd never let anything happen to us. You're my wife, for God's sake. Why are you being so paranoid?" His words stung, and I felt a lump forming in my throat. He couldn't see what I was seeing, or maybe he refused to. Either way, I was left alone with my suspicions, feeling increasingly isolated in my own home. From that moment on, my relationship with Clara grew strained. Every time I saw her prancing around the house in barely there clothes or laughing a little too loudly at one of Daniel's jokes, a sense of betrayal twisted in my stomach. The friend I had once trusted, who had shared my home and my life, now felt like a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. As the days passed, I found myself withdrawing, spending more time with the kids or finding excuses to leave the house. And through it all, Clara continued her charade, blissfully unaware of the fracture she had driven through my marriage, or perhaps entirely aware and simply choosing to ignore it. The woman I had welcomed with open arms, offering her refuge in her time of need, was slowly becoming my greatest source of insecurity, a shadow hanging over my once happy home. And for the first time, I began to wonder if allowing her into our lives had been the biggest mistake I'd ever made. Things only grew worse over the following weeks. Clara continued to ignore my requests, seeming almost bolder with each choice she made. Her barely there shorts and thin, revealing tops became her uniform. Daniel, to my utter dismay, seemed captivated. If I caught him glancing her way once, I'd catch him 10 times. A lingering look here, a soft chuckle there, as if he were entranced by her presence. It was painful to witness, each glance a small crack in my already fragile heart. I wanted to trust him, but every look he gave her chipped away at my confidence, bringing forth a gnawing suspicion that began to take root deep inside me. One day, after Clara walked by in an especially tight dress, I saw Daniel's eyes follow her like he was mesmerized. In that moment, a mixture of hurt and anger flared within me, twisting my stomach. When she left the room, I looked directly at him, hoping he'd see the anguish in my eyes, but he simply brushed me off, asking, "What's wrong?" As though he were blissfully desperate to regain some control. I started finding ways to escape Clara's presence. Mornings, I'd wake up earlier, rushing Daniel out the door to work with me, leaving her alone in the house. Anything to break the growing magnetic pull I sensed between them. And yet each time I returned, I'd find her there, more settled, more rooted, as if she were digging her way into every part of my life. The air between us felt colder, and even the children sensed the strain, asking why Mommy and Auntie Clara didn't talk as much anymore. I found myself questioning everything, from her motives to my own sanity. How had it come to this? How had I allowed someone to infiltrate my marriage, my home, my life? Months passed, and there was still no sign of Clara moving out. When I brought up the topic of her finding a job, she would dismiss it, saying, "I'm trying, Lucy, but things just haven't worked out yet." I didn't believe her anymore. She had plenty of opportunities, plenty of time to find work or another place to stay. Yet each time I asked, her answers were vague, her promises empty. It became clear that she had no intention of leaving. Frustrated, I tried to offer her a way out, proposing that I could help cover her rent for the first month in a new place. I even offered to help with the deposit, practically begging her to find somewhere, anywhere to go. But Clara found excuse after excuse, delay after delay, each one stalling her departure. Every postponed plan only deepened my frustration, a constant reminder that I'd invited her into my life, yet couldn't get her to leave. But the breaking point came one evening when I walked into the sitting room and found them together on the couch. They were sitting close, closer than I'd ever seen. Clara's hand rested casually on his thigh. Their heads bent close, and Clara about to kiss Daniel. Before I could process what was happening, Clara turned toward him, her hand trailing up his leg, her face inches from his. Daniel didn't pull away, didn't move, as if he were spellbound. A surge of fury rose within me, and without thinking, I stepped into the room, my voice shaking as I called out, "What is going on here?" They jumped apart, both of them frozen, caught like children with their hands in the cookie jar. Clara stood up, a flicker of defiance in her eyes, while Daniel looked at me, his face flushed. He muttered something about getting carried away, stumbling over his words, blaming the devil, claiming it was a moment of weakness, but I knew better. I had watched the buildup, felt the weight of their stolen glances, the tension they thought they could hide. That night, as Daniel tried to explain himself, offering hollow reassurances and half-hearted apologies, I lay awake, a storm of betrayal and resentment swirling within me. Every part of me felt raw, exposed. The following morning, I was resolute. I could no longer let Clara's presence poison my life and erode the foundation of my marriage. I approached her as she sipped her coffee, calm but determined. "You need to leave, Clara, today. No more delays, no more excuses." She looked at me, feigning surprise, as if the events of the night before hadn't just exposed her motives. "Lucy, are you serious?" she asked, her tone laced with false innocence, but I didn't waver. "Yes," I said firmly. "It's time you found somewhere else. I've done everything I can to help you, but you've overstayed your welcome." For a moment, I thought she'd argue, but something in my tone, in my unyielding expression, must have told her I was done. She stood, setting her cup down, a smirk playing at her lips as she walked out of the room. I didn't feel victorious, only hollow and exhausted. As she packed her things, I felt a bittersweet relief. The betrayal, the mistrust, the shattered illusion of friendship, all of it lay in ruins. I had learned the hard way that kindness and trust could be exploited, that some people, no matter how well you think you know them, could turn your life into a nightmare. With Clara finally gone, a strange quiet settled over the house. The tension dissipated, but so did the warmth that had once filled our home. I knew it would take time to rebuild the trust between Daniel and me, to heal from the wounds left by Clara's betrayal. The children seemed to sense the shift as well, asking where Auntie Clara had gone, their innocent questions tearing at my heart. Daniel tried his best to mend things, taking time to reassure me, to rebuild what had been broken. But the scars remained, each one a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. Our marriage had weathered the storm, but it was no longer the same. I had changed, too, wiser, perhaps, but more guarded, my trust tempered with caution. In the end, I had learned to protect my boundaries fiercely, to value my own intuition, and to hold onto the things I loved with iron grip. Clara's chapter in my life was over, but her presence lingered, a shadow that would always remind me of the cost of misplaced trust.
If you found this story gripping, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more intense and eye-opening stories just like this one. And remember, your support means everything. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.